All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the fifth MedTalk seminar in our second year of Youth Medical Society, also known as YMS. I am Akash Murali, the founder and president, and it has been a pleasure, along with the founding officers, to see how the club has grown to over more than 100 members. I now have the privilege of beginning to pass the baton on to our new officer cohort as they prepare to graduate, and our new president is Akash. So over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Akarsh, for that introduction. So yeah, for anyone new here, YMS is committed to providing high school students with an interest in medicine access to expert medical professionals. I want to welcome all of our existing members and our new members as we enter spring semester. We've had a nice lineup of talks this semester, and we have one last one next month with Dr. Malathi Srinivasan, who is a clinical professor of medicine at Stanford. So it's one you really don't want to miss. And we are also looking for speakers for next year as well. So if anyone has any professionals that you think members would like to hear from, please don't hesitate to let us know, and we can work with you to confirm their sessions with the group. I want to thank all of you for your support as we learn more about careers in health fields, and a special thank you to our officers for building a strong foundation for YMS. And I encourage you members to visit our website to watch our MedTalk seminars that we conducted last year. This one will be recorded on that as well. So with that, today's medical speaker is Dr. Mahoney. Dr. Mahoney received his undergraduate education at the University of Florida and undergraduate medical education at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. During his residency training in anesthesiology at the Mount Sinai Hospital, he acquired expertise in simulation education through the clinical education residency track in human emulation education and evaluation lab for patient safety and professional study or health center. He went on to complete a fellowship training in obstetric anesthesiology at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Dr. Mahoney now currently serves as the residency program director at the Mount Sinai St. Luke's and West Hospitals Department of Anesthesiology, and as a faculty member in the Division of Obstetric Anesthesiology, and a faculty member of the Health Center at the Mount Sinai Hospital Icahn School of Medicine. He serves on multiple committees in regional, national, international, and subspecialty societies, and his research focuses on obstetric anesthesiology, physical well-being, and graduate medical education. So now Dr. Mahoney will provide some introductory remarks followed by a Q&A session. Once again, Dr. Mahoney, thank you for taking the time to join us today. To get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and what experiences made you want to initially pursue a career in medicine and anesthesiology, and then later take on more of a medical education track as director of the residency program at Mount Sinai?
Thank you very much, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. And congratulations on all of you for getting started early, thinking about a great career in life in medicine. So where did I grow up? All over the country. I can even call myself a Californian. My father was a member of the Air Force. He was an enlisted man in the Air Force, not an officer. And my mother was a nurse, and we traveled all over the country. I was born in New England, spent some time in South Dakota, and actually spent my early childhood in Southern California, down in Long Beach, Los Angeles area. Ended up going back to the East Coast and spent my formative years in Charleston, South Carolina. My father retired to Florida, and I finished out high school in Florida, which is why I ended up at University of Florida, a great public university. Seeing my mother as a nurse always gave me a sense of the importance of having a service-oriented career. I think it's important that all of you guys know that medicine truly is a service-oriented career. What's great about it is it melds service, so doing something that's important, with great job security and reliable income. So when I was starting college, I was thinking maybe I wanted to do medicine. I had a nice scholarship at the University of Florida. I was a National Merit Scholar. And, actually dabbled in pre-medical courses. And I said, hey, this is too much work. I'm not going to do this. And went back and did a major in psychology. And actually, I was studying advertising. And as I got to the end of my college career, I was looking at my future and looking at what I was going to do with my life. And I just wasn't satisfied with the options ahead of me. Kind of the values I was raised with, going back to, see my mother as a nurse and being part of a working class family, came back to haunt me. And I was like, I'm a pretty smart kid. I got a full scholarship. I should probably do something with myself. and I recommitted myself to medicine, and I actually did something I wouldn't suggest to any of you. I did all of my pre-medical courses in 2 semesters with about 18 credit hours per semester, all pre-med, the same time doing research and at the same time doing volunteering. So all the stuff you would try to do over the course of your entire college career, I did in 2 semesters. But luckily I did it well. And, I needed a couple of years after that to get my MCAT done and do applications to medical school, and got into some great medical schools, and chose Mount Sinai in New York. It was a chance for me to get to a big city. It was a great medical school. And, I've left for brief periods of time for training, but been stuck here ever since. And now I have a wonderful job. In regards to going into education, I have to be honest, I didn't think that was part of my career. I've always liked teaching. One of the ways I got through college and was successful was tutoring my fellow classmates. I would hold study sessions and kind of review topics and concepts people had a hard time with. Helped a lot in physics, organic chemistry. But I didn't think about that when I got to medical school. In fact, I got to medical school, thought I'd be a family doctor, have a long-term relationship with patients, and found anesthesia. It was a surprise to me. It was a heck of a good time, really fun time in the operating room, doing procedures, interacting with patients in a really critical period of their life, save a lot of lives, which is a lot of fun. Still didn't think I wanted to do education, but you know what? Sometimes you don't follow what you think you want to do. You look at what you enjoy. And I looked around and found myself being happiest when I was teaching, educating, mentoring. And I've been doing this for 7 years. I've been running the residency training program. For those of you, who are early on and thinking about medicine, what is residency? Well, you get into medical school, you do 4 years, then you apply to residency in the subspecialty. And so what I do is I recruit the medical students going into anesthesiology, and I train them for 4 years. And I help them find fellowships and jobs. And I gotta say, I'm the happiest person that I know in my life, in my workplace. So not only was going into medicine a great choice, but specifically going to medical education has really been gratifying.
Awesome, thank you. So now I'll hand it over to our officers to ask a couple more questions. So Rishi, why don't you start?
Could you tell us a little bit about your academic trajectory, having received your degrees at the University of Florida and Mount Sinai Hospital?
Yeah, as I said earlier, medicine is something even though I had inklings early on, I came to rather late. And even though I was maybe not the most studious college student, I was lucky. I went to a great public university, but it wasn't, there were some really tough schools out there: Cornell, Williams College, Vanderbilt. If you go to those places, you're not ready to work, you're going to sink. Luckily at Florida, a person, a wayward soul like myself, could kind of float along, and I maintained a 4.0 grade point average, even when I was like, quote unquote, screwing around. And then did pre-med courses the last year and did very well. I got a 4.0 through those courses, and not just a 4.0, I basically got the top score in every class. And even then, I got waitlisted at Mount Sinai. I got waitlisted without ever coming off the wait list at schools like Washington University. I didn't apply that broadly. I think I applied to 10 or 12 medical schools. I got accepted to 3 ultimately. So it's pretty competitive. I chose Mount Sinai actually because it was had a pass-fail curriculum until the clinical years. And then, and then I got to medical school, and after a couple of years off, I was kind of slacker again. But it was a pass-fail school. I learned what I needed to learn, but then I got into the clinical years. So, the 3rd and 4th year of medical school are where you get into the wards, you start doing clinical work, and there I really thrived. It was really more fascinating to me. I got to medical school. You guys should be prepared for this. Medical school is not really a conceptual learning environment. You're doing a lot of memorization. And for some people, that's, easy because that's something they've gotten used to doing in college and high school, but I didn't enjoy it very much. But then you get into the ward, you start treating patients, and it becomes much more conceptual. There's something called adult learning theory, which is adults like to learn about things that are practical, that are applicable. And you start to really see the applicability of the things that seem more boring in the first years of medical school. I did very well during that period, and luckily was recruited to some of the top anesthesia programs that I was applying to. And things really took off. I guess academic trajectory, you really got to bring your A game in college. Medical school is incredibly competitive. I was on the admissions committee for Mount Sinai. I mean, ultimately I had a 3.96 that I graduated with, summa cum laude from UF. Still got waitlisted a ton of medical schools. They do look at, the pedigree of the undergraduate institution you go to, but it's pretty darn competitive these days to get into medical school. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I did. And also, what were some of the choices that made you follow this career path?
Well, medicine in general, first, it's just, I was actually adopted into a working class family, and I'd always done very, very well in school. And I had a sense of obligation, I was a pretty smart guy. I wanted to use my talents and my gifts for the betterment of society. I'm a firm believer that, we have a brief period on this earth and we have an obligation to help our fellow man and do something of service. So that was really, really important to me. And then by the end of college, or the start of my junior year, I realized I had to start, living out my values a little bit more. So I think that's what motivated me going to medicine in general. And then I thought in medicine, that would be, the vision you have of what a doctor is, the doctor you see your pediatrician, you see a family doctor. But when I got into medical school, that wasn't actually very much fun. When I was on my family medicine rotation, I remember they would put a patient's chart in the door in front of the offices, in front of the little visit rooms. And as a medical student, they would say, just kind of hang out. When you see a chart in the door, just grab the chart and go in there and start talking to the patient before your attending goes in. Oh, I hated seeing charts in those doors. I did not like it at all. And I realized, I had this vision of what it was to be a doctor, but I didn't really like just grabbing the charts, and you have a brief period with patients and they're in and they're out. And then this anesthesia thing, right? And anesthesia wasn't something that was in my vision of what a doctor was. In anesthesia, you meet someone maybe before surgery, they're really nervous, you put in an IV, you take them in the operating room, you push drugs, they fall asleep, you put a breathing tube in, you put tubes in their arteries, give them drugs and their blood pressure goes up and it comes down. It's crazy. Sometimes they try to die on you, got to save their lives. You become an expert in physiology. You become someone who really can. When I'm at a family party and someone's like, oh, I have this rash, what do I do? I'm like, I don't know, but if you have a heart attack, I can save you. But your rash, I have no idea. So anesthesia just came out of nowhere. Really exciting career. I'm an obstetric anesthesiologist now. I'm actually in the call room up on labor and delivery. Over the course of tonight, a woman could try to bleed to death on me and I will save her life. I mean, how amazing is that? So anesthesia offered this really hands-on way of practicing medicine. What's good about it is hands-on, but it's coupled. I really, really have to understand the human body. I have to understand how your heart works, how your lungs work, how the medications we give interact with your physiology. And I use it every day. And it's a heck of a good time.
Thank you. One other question I had was, were there any particular experiences going through training or work experiences that stood out to you as key learning moments?
Yeah, absolutely. Life is a funny thing. You guys are here, you're in high school, you have this whole notion of what you're going to do with your life. But the plans that you have for yourself don't come anywhere close to the surprises. They're nowhere near as good as the surprises that your life has in store for you. And a lot of those twists and turns in your life are really contingent or dependent on the people who enter your life. And I would call those people mentors. You're going to meet mentors in college. Pay close attention, guys. That mentor in college is way more important than that chemistry class. So for me, it was a mentor. I remember early on, I was my first year of medical school, and man, it was a drag. I'm memorizing these copious amounts of facts, and I was like, going back in physics, I love physics. I could figure out the answer. I could figure out the equations on the test. It was all conceptual. Medicine was just memorization. And then they put me in the simulation lab. And all the students went to the simulation lab to learn physiology. And we have these mannequins, right? The mannequins have blood pressure that can go up and down. And you can do stuff like a person. And they react, they respond in a somewhat realistic manner that mimics human physiology. And there's this dude there named Adam. He was an anesthesiologist. And he started showing us physiology. We put our hands on this mannequin, we do things, and we'd watch the monitors and heart rate, the blood pressure, the respiratory rate all change. And I remember he asked a question And someone was sitting there thinking, he said, listen, the answer, you won't know the answer to this question. Like, it's not in a textbook. I'm asking you to think. And I remember he said that. I'm like, this is the first time in medical school that someone's asked me to think. And that's what I like to do. I love thinking. And I got every single answer right, because it wasn't about memorization. It was about thinking about the concepts. If X and then Y, then what would Z be? You know, thinking. And that was the first person that really captured my enthusiasm in medical school. At that point, I didn't think about anesthesia, so I just liked this guy. I liked the way he taught. I came back to him later on and asked if I could help out in the simulation lab. And I spent my 3rd and 4th year working in that lab, and I ended up teaching that same class to junior medical students when I was a 4th year medical student. And then I joined his residency and kept on teaching the class. I still teach the same lessons to this day. So that was a really critical juncture in my education. And I would say to all of you, slow down. Look at the people you enjoy spending time with, the people that you jibe with. And I would say those are going to be your mentors. And they might jerk you out of the path that you think you need to be on. But guess what? If they jerk you out of it, if that seems to fit better, that's actually the path that you want to be on.
Thank you. I'll pass it over to Varun now.
I was wondering, what does your typical workday look like, and what do you enjoy about it?
So you know what I enjoy about my typical workday? There's no such thing as a typical workday for me. And that's what I like about my particular career. Now, what I'm going to tell you I do is probably, not typical of a doctor, but it is a career any of you can have. So I am an obstetric anesthesiologist, a general anesthesiologist as well, and I'm a medical educator. So let me talk about the last 4 weeks of my life. I spent a couple of weeks with a brand new intern, introducing them to the operating room. So every day I get into the operating room around 7 a.m. with a preoperative area. I'm with an intern. He or she was a she, sees the patient. We get to know the patient, bring them into the operating room. Maybe one day we're doing gynecologic surgeries. Breathe one day we're doing neurosurgery, maybe orthopedic surgeries. They're all different anesthesia. Sometimes we give you medications in the IV, so they just kind of breathe on their own, sleepy. Sometimes we put a breathing tube in with general anesthesia. Sometimes we do a shot in the back, a spinal anesthesia, numbs them from the waist down so they can do surgery on their knees and hips. Different. You have between 2 to 8 different surgical procedures through the course of the day. This is a day of a general anesthesiologist. That was 2 weeks with an intern. Then I hopped on a plane. I went to a conference in the Midwest, a conference for educators in anesthesia. I presented 4 workshops, went to many other workshops, did sessions, met people from around the country in my profession. Then I hopped on a plane to Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and I gave a presentation, the Grand Rounds presentation. And I taught the residents and spoke to the faculty, got a tour. And then I flew back here. And after that, I've spent most of my week in labor and delivery. I come in at 7 a.m. There's 12 some odd women laboring. Some have C-sections, some deliver in their labor rooms. We place epidurals. We do spinal anesthesia for cesarean sections. Sometimes they try to bleed to death on me. We save them, give them big IVs, pour blood into them. Sometimes something bad happens to their baby. We rush to the operating room and quickly give them anesthesia and settle things down. And I'm here with you now. Tomorrow, I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to go to Chicago, and I'm going to learn. I'm going to go to a workshop where I'm going to learn new skills, learning using ultrasound to diagnose patients at the bedside whose hearts are failing, who have problems with their lungs, like a pneumothorax. So I'm still learning. I'm going to come back, do a mix. I'm going to do some labor and delivery, do some general anesthesia, depending on the day, maybe have a day off to do administrative work because I run the residency. Then I'm going to hop on a plane again and go back to Chicago for this obstetric anesthesia conference. I'm going to present. I'm going to moderate sessions. I'm going to meet colleagues. And then I'm going to fly to Raleigh, North Carolina, because I'm an examiner for the American Board of Anesthesiology. Every person, when they finish anesthesiology training, has to take an oral examination. I administer the oral examinations to the new anesthesiologists. We do that for a week. Then I'm going to come back and do it all again. So I have a really fun career. Any week could be totally different from any other week. Sometimes it's in the main operating room, sometimes on labor and delivery, sometimes teaching. in the classroom, sometimes just, doing administrative work to run the residency, to recruit. I interview 250 people every year during interview season as people are applying for residency. So my job, there's no typical day, and that's what I love about it. I get very bored very easily. I need to have a variety, and you can have that in medicine. What I do, you can do in any field of medicine. If you get into research, if you get into education, you can have something where every day is different.
I'm wondering, what are some of the challenges associated with that kind of lifestyle or that kind of career path?
Well, it is challenging. There are a lot of people who wouldn't choose my career path because, as you can hear, it sounds like it's pretty consuming. My daughter just, called me or was texting me while we were waiting to start. So I have 2 children and I'm married. But, my life is pretty consumed with my career. And my wife's career is pretty consuming. She's actually a deputy commissioner of health here in New York City. So what do? We have grandparents. Grandparents take care of the kids. My wife was working 100 hours a week for 3 years during COVID because she was basically in charge of COVID for New York City. During the worst parts of COVID, I was working a lot. My kids had to leave, go be with the in-laws, so we get a lot of help. So my career is pretty consuming. There are people who wouldn't choose it. There are some people who get a job in anesthesia where they come in at 7 every day and go home at 2 or 3. Nowadays, a lot of people come out of training and ask for jobs with no calls and no weekends. They get them because the market's pretty good, but that's not typical. So I'm at one end of the spectrum, which is pretty challenging. And the challenges are met with help. In my case, it's grandparents who basically live 2 floors down. We're in New York City, so I bought them a condo in my building and they take care of my kids. Some people in my position get nannies. Many people in my position, their spouse wouldn't be able to work because my job is so consuming. But I love it, so it's worth it.
Yeah, so that's, I think one of the things that I'm wary about if I want to go into a career in medicine is how much work you have to put in. So you're saying if you enjoy it, then it's like a livable life?
It depends on what you want. So anesthesiology is typically considered a lifestyle profession. Now, I am not an example of someone with a lifestyle career. There are people who work in anesthesiology 30 to 40 hours a week, and they still make $300,000 to $400,000 a year. I would call that a lifestyle career for sure. That's very doable. Job security is amazing in medicine. You can pick what you want to do. For me, it's really important to feel like I'm doing something. And, anyone who comes in 9 to 5 and does medicine, they're doing something important. I think that's a great thing about medicine. When you go home, maybe you're having a dinner with a family, friends, or a couple who are some of your friends. Maybe they work in banking or some other career. You realize that they don't get the same amount of satisfaction. So even if you have a 40-hour-a-week job in medicine, I think you can still come home and say, what I did today matters. For me, it's more important to feel like I'm impacting people's lives, like the lives of the trainees, and doing something a little more meaningful to me. But you can pick whatever you want. You can have a 9 to 5 in internal medicine, family medicine, a specialty. But when you get into academic medicine like I am, I think you start to see people with the kind of schedule and career that I have.
Have you done any research? I know some doctors who have done some research as well as been in the clinic.
Yeah, especially when you're in academics, meaning, working out of, so I'm at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. There's a medical school, a graduate school. In academic medicine, there's a lot of research that happens. Now that being said, we have a lot of medical services needed in this hospital. So there are many doctors who don't do research. They are in an academic center, but they don't do research. I do, obviously. But I try to do things that I'm interested in. So my research focuses primarily on graduate medical education. Graduate medical education in medicine means people who have finished residency who are training, like residents. Finished medical school who are training, who are residents. So I do research on different approaches to graduate medical education, a lot in simulation, a lot of factors that impact trainees, like burnout, well-being is a big notion in medicine, especially during COVID. So I do research in how to optimize burnout. And then I do research into my subspecialty field of obstetric anesthesiology. I'm not the heaviest researcher. A lot of academic titles are gained through the amount of research you do. I'm an associate professor, so I'm pretty moderate. I do a lot of speaking and do a lot of teaching at workshops. But when you're in academic medicine, you're going to come up across research. Now, for you guys, research is a big part of many people's application to medical school, and it helps. But as you approach this, when you go into college, try to do something that you're passionate about. And if you hate research, forget it. You don't have to do it. Maybe it's a student organization that you're more passionate about. But I would say research is something that many of you are going to be, told you should do. I reviewed applications. If there's something that's not research you're really passionate about, you can speak passionately about, and you can make a name for yourself, I think that's where you should put your efforts. And I think that applies all the way through your career.
Thank you. So I'll hand it over to Rishi.
So you have gone further to serve on various committees, and you're currently shaping the medical education field. Why did you want to get into the medical education side in addition to practicing, and why are you thinking about medical professionals of the future?
So it's actually interesting. I'm leading, so there's a society called Society for Education and Anesthesia, and a colleague of mine and I are running the next session in the fall, and each session has a theme, and our theme is developing a professional identity. So this is something I'm very, very interested in. When I first started my training, I didn't think I was going to be in education, but again, it's something I enjoyed. To be even more cynical about it, when I was a trainee, there were doctors I worked with, faculty, I didn't like the way they taught. And so part of it was I wanted to do it to show everybody how I thought you should do it, how I wanted to be. I wanted to treat people the way I thought I should have been treated by those who weren't doing such a great job. And I take that responsibility very seriously. And I think that's why I found a lot of success in it. So yeah, it wasn't something I had in mind far in advance. I just realized I really loved spending time with trainees. As a senior resident, I like teaching the junior residents, I like teaching the students. And I found success. And it also got me the ability to have, like I described, a really variable day-to-day life. I get to travel, I get to work with these committees. And talking about, you talked about the societies that I'm a part of. That's really fun. There are doctors across the country. I get to talk to and network with some of the brightest people in my subspecialty and in education in general. I sit on society committees. I help to develop the guidelines for instance, I just developed a new guidelines on what we call MPO, or the rules about what people can eat before they come for labor. If you're laboring, what can you eat? Can you drink things? Can you eat things? So I got to make the guidelines for things like that. I make educational materials for patients that are branded by the American Society of Anesthesiologists or the Society for OB Anesthesia. And it's fun. Again, I talk about service a lot. Any profession also needs to be maintained. So there are people that do all of the boring work to maintain the profession. What are the profession's guidelines for how you should do things? What are the societies and organizations that we create and maintain to bring on new people, to network, to spread information and knowledge, to keep each other educated with the most recent evidence? And I just enjoy being part of that process and doing all of that work. And again, I get to travel, meet cool people, and be part of things that I think are globally important.
Thank you for answering that question. I do have one more though. Could you tell us about how COVID-19 had an impact on your work? Like, what were some of the setbacks that happened due to this virus?
Yeah, so it really impacted my life quite a bit. I'm in New York City, and you guys probably remember that New York City was the first city to be hit hard, and we were hit the hardest. I don't know if you've ever visited New York City, but it's a loud, bustling city. And after COVID hit, it was like a post-apocalyptic landscape. You'd have These huge Times Square was empty. There was no one in the streets. Hit my family pretty hard. My wife works at the health department. She was actually named the incident commander for COVID-19. She was essentially in charge of COVID-19 for New York City. So it was weird for my family because she knew it was going to be a bad thing about a month before anyone else could admit it. So I had kind of like forewarning about it, which is important because I'm in charge of this training program. So it changed everything. I sent my parents and my children out of the city. I was working nonstop. My wife was working nonstop, totally overhauled the training program. So hospitals canceled all what we call elective surgeries. You know, if you have to have your knee fixed or your hip fixed or your gallbladder's acting up, you want it out, done. Even pretty urgent surgeries, people who needed heart surgeries, those were postponed, right? So that's the bread and butter of what anesthesiologists typically do every day. It was done. So what did my department or my colleagues do? We became intensive care doctors. And we have a lot of that training, you know, even though we don't do it every day, you get a lot of that training. We understand physiology. We understand how to take care of sick patients. So I did shifts in an ICU totally run by anesthesiologists and staffed by anesthesia residents. Because people didn't stop having babies, my particular subspecialty continued. So I did a lot. I was working on call every other night on labor and delivery for a stretch. And the biggest thing was holding everything together as a leader in a department. You know, you had people under a lot of strain. So a lot of what I was doing was monitoring how people were doing, rotating people in and out of the intensive care units, planning. You know, I didn't want the hospital to take my trainees and ship them over to Queens. You might have heard Queens was pretty awful. So making sure they had something to do, checking in on them. We had Friday evening Zoom meetings where we all opened up a cocktail and talked about how things were going, and, you know, totally overhauled our lives. And every morning we had a strategy session with the department leadership. How are things going? Who is sick? It changed everything. You know, good things came out of it. In my line of work, there were some opportunities and advantages I could take care of. My wife got promoted to basically be the second in command in the New York City Health Department because of her work. So some good things came out, but it really changed our entire lives. But I'll tell you this, there was a lot of depression. A lot of people were sad. You know, you guys are in high school. Maybe it ruined Akash, you're a senior. Maybe it ruined your high school career to a certain extent. There was a patient, I remember it was a couple of weeks after people started coming back to the hospital and having surgeries again. And this woman came in and her eyes were wide. She was looking around. She's like, I haven't interacted with another person in months. And she looked and she said, you guys have been doing this whole time, haven't you? I'm like, yeah, I've been coming to work every day. So as, you know, everyone talked about all the hard work that healthcare workers had to do and we did, but I had a reason to keep going to work. You know, I got to keep doing what I do. And so other people got depressed. I never got depressed. It sounds ironic. It was one of the most thrilling times in my life. You know, there was a huge crisis and I got to do something to help. So there's nothing I'd rather have been doing than what I was doing during COVID.
Okay, I was especially as an anesthesiologist, your work is like really directly impactful in your patients' lives, and if you mess up, it could actually result in a patient's death. I was wondering how you can cope with like the amount of stress that comes with that, and like how do you manage that stress?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some people have a really hard time with that, Varun. You know, it's a funny thing growing up. I look at you guys, I remember myself in high school. I was a bit of a joker. I like to play a lot of video games. I like comic books. I want to go to concerts. I was kind of not the most serious person in the world. There's something great about responsibility. It makes you grow up. And like, it's scary. Like, oh my God, all this responsibility. But guess what? Life is way better. It's awesome. So I guess my answer to your question is, how do you cope? You cope by stepping up to the plate and knowing that you have the skills and the knowledge to handle it. I was very fortunate. Anesthesiology has a lot to do with human physiology, how the heart works, how the lungs work. You guys probably just think we put you to sleep for surgery, but that's nothing. That's the tiniest part of what we do. We keep you alive. Now, I mentioned that I spent a lot of time in the simulation lab learning and teaching physiology as a medical student. This wasn't a plan. This was pure coincidence and pure luck. But when I became an anesthesiologist, even when I started my training, I had already spent a lot of time really mastering the physiology. And that helps me to not feel stress or anxiety. Yes, I have someone's life in my hands. But the reason it's not stressful is because I know what to do. And the reason I know what to do is I took the responsibility to be sure that I got the training and the knowledge. And because I have that, there is no reason to be stressed out. I've been able to arrive at a point where if something goes wrong, it was going to go wrong. I know what to do, and all I have to do is do what I know. Some things are out of your hands. And I guess that's part of it too. You have to accept that some things aren't in your hands. If an old person comes and they've been hit by a bus, listen, I can do my best. Is my best maybe better than a junior trainee's? Of course it is. So the training really comes into play. But if I do my best, then there are very, very, very few times where I look back and say, oh my gosh, I really screwed up. I have. We all do. But all you can do is your best. But taking responsibility and taking your job and your education seriously is the way that I think you avoid the stress later on.
Okay, thank you. So I had another question. How is the field of anesthesiology changing in recent times? And are there any advancements that are exciting?
Well, technology and the economy really impact medicine in general quite a bit. There are some other professions that have been radically altered by technology. Radiology, for example. Back in the day, there was a saying, it was the road to happiness, and the road was an acronym. It was radiology, ophthalmology, anesthesiology, and dermatology. And these were typically like really competitive because you got paid great money and it was a great lifestyle. Well, it's no longer road. It's like, I guess it's ode, because radiology's dropped off to a large extent because technology has made it such that you don't even need a radiologist in-house, right? They can just ship the images somewhere else where they can be read by people paid a lot less. So technology always plays a huge role. Technology has hit anesthesia, really altered anesthesia, probably since the late 1990s. We put breathing tubes in people and breathe for them. That's actually a pretty critical point. Back in the day, you have something called a laryngoscope. It's a little metal blade, and you go in someone's mouth when they're asleep, and you have to see their vocal cords, right? And put a little tube between their vocal cords. And that was pretty dicey. Sometimes you'd put it in their esophagus and you thought you got it in the right place. And next thing you know, it's not in the right place, but how do you know? Well, some advancements in the 90s really changed things. Things called capnography and pulse oximetry became very widespread. Pulse oximetry measures the oxygenation in your blood. It's a little button you see on people's fingers when you watch like shows about doctors. So eventually, if you saw the oxygenation coming down, you go, oh, maybe I put that tube in their esophagus and I'm breathing their stomach instead of their lungs, right? And there's another advancement called capnography, which is it senses the carbon dioxide that you breathe out. And that changes everything. You put a tube in someone's stomach, there's no carbon dioxide. You put it in their lungs, there is. So that made anesthesia much safer. Also, we have other tools like video laryngoscopy. We have little blades with cameras at the tip. So you look at the screen while you're putting in the breathing tube, really alter the safety profile of anesthesia. 30 years ago, you went for surgery. It was much less safe than flying a plane or than being on a plane. Now it's very, very safe. So that's really altered anesthesia. So technology is going to continue to alter anesthesiology. Some of the changes in technology now were mechanisms of monitoring. So there's talk about having, people who are less well-trained in the operating room while you have an anesthesiologist looking at a lot of screens and monitoring like an air traffic controller, right? And looking to see if anything's going wrong. That's probably not going to be a major change in the near future. And the economy changes things quite a bit. You at your stage, you might think, oh, if you need more doctors in a certain area, then there's some person who says we'll train more. It doesn't work like that. We live in a free market economy and there's not a feedback loop. So we don't train enough doctors to serve the needs of our society. And so how do hospitals and communities respond? Well, they get someone who's not a doctor, right, to provide the same services. So the economy plays a huge role in the change of anesthesia. So I think the biggest factors, and this isn't just anesthesiology, it really impacts many fields. Emergency medicine is one that's majorly impacted by things like this. Dentistry, oddly enough. You see people who have lower levels of training providing a lot of services, and more than that, we make a lot of money. Well, people who already have a lot of money, you know what they want? They want more money. So they look at doctors like me and say, well, how can I have some of their money? So what they do is they buy out all these practices, and they make us, instead of us being doctors who own a practice, they buy out the emergency rooms, they buy out the anesthesia groups, they make us employees of their company. And so that's another big economic force at play in medicine right now. About 20 years ago, 30% of physicians were employees and 70% were people who owned their practice. It's flipped. Nowadays, well over 70% of people are employees. I'm an employee of a hospital, or they're employees of these large groups. And only a small percentage of doctors own their practice anymore. So economic factors play a large role in medicine. That being said, the job security in medicine is still phenomenal, but you don't have the old model of the doctor who is self-employed, who visits the hospital because their patients go there. No, they visit the hospital because they're an employee of the hospital, and those patients are the hospital's patients.
Thank you. So that was the end of our planned questions. If anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, I'll give you guys a second.
You said you were on the committee for choosing who would be going to who'd be going to your college, right?
I was on the admissions committee for my medical school when I was a fourth-year medical student.
I was wondering what red flags you were looking for when you looked at admissions.
Well, I'll tell you, I had a red flag on my application, I thought. When you go into college, you live in residency halls, and I was caught on the all-girls floor, and they wrote me up. I got a little thing in my file in college. I thought, oh my God, it's going to ruin my application for medical school. It didn't. It was nothing. But, getting in trouble in college, drunk driving will ruin your life, guys. Don't do it. Trust me, just ruin your life. So people who had arrests, those are red flags. It's obviously a red flag to have a bad grade, or you want to see people who are passionate. I think you can hear in my voice, I love what I do. And we're trying to look for people who want to go into medicine for the right reasons. So a red flag is, someone who looks like maybe it wasn't their passion or something their parents wanted them to do, or they felt obliged to do. You want to see a real passion. So, seeing someone who doesn't seem to have that drive, that is a red flag. But yeah, having something on your criminal record is huge. It might seem crazy to you right now, but it happens a lot to college students. That's big. And then, someone who doesn't really have kind of intrinsic drive to go into medicine.
So just to follow up to that answer, how much would you say you would outweigh the passion to do medicine? So if you could read from their application that they're truly passionate about going into medicine, but say they have a few bad grades or something like that, would you say their intrinsic drive and passion to go into that field outweighs those few blunders in their GPA or transcript?
It depends. It depends. A 3.1 is a bad GPA. Ain't nothing gonna outweigh that. I had a 3.96 and I was waitlisted at a couple places. So that tells you, when you say a couple of bad grades, that's like a couple of non-A's, right? But no, the passion really does outweigh it, because what you're looking at an army of people who all have these grades and these MCAT scores, right? So you start to look for something that really shines. And that's why I was saying earlier, people are going to say you should do research. Fine. You should go to a lab on your campus or college campus, get involved in some research, see if you like it. But, finding something maybe it's student government, maybe it's sports. This sounds dumb, but you love seeing someone who is on a varsity team for their college, who did something really amazing. Maybe it's like student government. That really goes a long way. And maybe it's not medical school related, but it shows that they're really involved in something. If you just kind of like go into a cave of being a pre-med student for 3 years, like what do you have to offer? Like what do you have? You have nothing. Like you have grades, but there's nothing that really speaks to you wanting to be involved in something bigger. So yeah, I think that passion is shown not necessarily for medicine, but passion is shown being passionate about something.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question actually.
Yeah.
So, what were some exciting or fun work experiences you've had that you're willing to share?
Like every day.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me talk about yesterday. So I'm on labor and delivery, right? And these patients, they have epidurals, and an epidural is a little tube that sits, it's like an IV, but it sits in the small of their back, and it gives medication through the duration of their labor. So it's like access to their spinal cord, essentially. And I get a text message from my junior resident. She says, "Oh, this patient might be going for a C-section." And I'm like, okay. So I start to kind of get my stuff together. I'm just I'm in this room right here, actually, which is very close. And then I get we have this little mechanism. They can do overhead announcements. I hear stat C-section. So I run in. So 5 minutes after this thing goes off, we have run over, put a bunch of really strong medications into this epidural, numbed this one from here down, brought her in the opera. So 5 minutes later, she's like, we have a baby. It's like, cut it right out of her. She's awake, she's numb, she's safe, baby is saved. The reason it was an emergency is the baby's heart rate dropped to show that it was in distress. That was pretty exciting. That happens all the darn time. Patients almost bleed to death. Transfuse them, happens all the time. Exciting things coming up. I'm gonna have graduation for my graduating anesthesiology residents. Their parents are gonna be there. I'm going to see their parents cry as they are proud of their children, watching them finish their training. That's pretty amazing too. I got to talk to all of the doctors in Mayo Clinic 2 weeks ago, give a presentation on something I'm passionate about. That was amazing. It's really, I mean, I have to tell you guys, when I was sitting in your shoes, in your chairs, I never thought I would have such an awesome life. Like it's unbelievable. Save people's lives on a regular basis, have a meaningful impact on what they do clinically, academically. It's awesome.
I have a question regarding about what you said earlier on COVID-19.
Mhm.
So I remember you saying that it had a large impact on your life and your workspace. So I was wondering, now that the pandemic has died down a little bit, have things returned to normal?
No, things will never return to normal. I mean, what is normal? What we're doing right here, this is a way of communicating that didn't really happen very much pre-COVID. You guys are younger, you're probably much more tech savvy, but I wasn't doing Zoom conference calls pre-COVID. Now I do it constantly. It's the primary means of having meetings and communicating. For interviews for residency, people would fly or drive into the city and we bring them in the hospital. That's all virtual. So no, a lot of things have, remained virtual. That's probably one of the bigger changes. But other than that, clinically, most things have returned primarily to normal. We're back to doing what we actually, it's a little bit busier than normal because we're still making up kind of for people who wanted surgery to some extent. So things are a little bit busier. So clinically, things are back to normal, but it's really changed the landscape of academic medicine. Probably in similar ways that it's changed like your academic careers. You guys are probably doing a lot more things virtually and a lot less in person. We're having conferences like society meetings in person again for the first time just in the last few months. So a lot of that is back to normal, but I don't think life is ever going to be normal or the way it was. There will be a new normal.
When you're applying to medical school, how big of a factor is the undergraduate school you went to?
That's a good question, and I wish I wasn't going to give you the answer I'm about to give you. It matters. It matters more than I thought. I thought I went to a pretty good undergraduate school, University of Florida. It's one of the top 10 public universities in the country. Apparently, it was pretty crappy, in the opinion of Mount Sinai. We actually had weighted scores. So if you went to Harvard, if you went to Princeton, you got bumped up. If you went to a really good public university, Berkeley, UCLA, Michigan, Virginia, UNC Chapel Hill, you got more. I guess I went to like just below the top tier public university. They actually weighed, this is just one school, I can't speak for everyone. They actually weighed your undergraduate institution. Now, that being said, I would be careful. I guess I could say I wish I knew myself back then. I didn't know myself, but I got lucky. There are some schools that if you're not ready, you're just going to sink. You know, Cornell is traditionally known as an incredibly difficult school. They are so difficult, we actually weighted the GPAs. A 3.5 from Cornell was considered a 4.0 because they had such difficult grading. Harvard doesn't give anything less than a B for a single class, so their GPAs are practically meaningless. So if I had gone to Cornell, I would have failed out of school as a freshman. So, you know yourself, know you're going to succeed. You're going to UC Davis next year, probably. You know, that's a great school. UC Davis is probably a place where you can get to know yourself, like ease into it a little bit compared to Vanderbilt. If you're not ready, you're going to get all C's your first semester. So also know yourself, but it does matter.
Thank you. If anyone else has any questions, I'll give you guys a second. Otherwise, we can wrap it up. Okay. Well, thanks again. This was really interesting. This was actually, I think, to me, one of the more interesting talks that we've had. So thank you so much. I know you have a really busy schedule. I think that our members will have get a lot of benefit from hearing you talk. And I know that they will sort of take a lot of this into consideration when they're looking at their futures, and your advice was really helpful. So thank you so much. I also want to express our appreciation for Mr. Chow, who is our advisor, who unfortunately wasn't able to make it today. And if anyone has any suggestions for future speakers, I encourage you all to talk to us about that. And yeah. We are also working with our initiative MedGives. We're working with Friends of Children with Special Needs. So if you want to know more about that, I think we have some information on our website. And as aspiring medical professionals, we have a responsibility to strengthen the social sector as well. So that's why we are doing that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Mahoney, again, and see you all next time.
Thank you, guys. Medicine's great.
Cool. Thank you so much for making time to join us today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Mahoney.
Okay.